All righty. Well, as people continue to come in to the waiting room here, I will do my little spiel that you guys are probably all used to by now. But welcome to our Winter Plant Talk series. I'm Michelle DeRusha, and I'm with Plant Nebraska. And today we are happy to have Christina Hoyt with us. And Christina is the Community Landscape, she has a super long title, Community Landscape and Forest Health Bureau Chief for the Nebraska Forest Service. And she's going to be talking about an important topic, one that we started talking about last week with Sarah Buckley, and that is the decline of tree canopy that we're seeing in many of our communities. There are a lot of reasons for this. Christina's going to tell us about that and give us a suggestion or two, maybe, for what we can do to help alleviate this challenge. So before we get to today's plant talk, let me just share my screen here so that I can make sure to give credit where credit is due. Just a reminder of who we are. Plant Nebraska is a nonprofit member organization, which means our work is funded by donations in part from people like you. So if you're not already a member of Plant Nebraska, we would love for you to consider becoming one. And you can find out more about membership levels and benefits at our website, which is plantnebraska.org. And I would like to thank JEO Consulting for sponsoring this year's Winter Plant Talk series. We record all of our Plant Talk webinars and we send out a link to the recording at the end of the day. So if you want to register for another one, but you don't know if you're going to be around to watch it, to participate in person, you don't have to worry because we will send you the link to the recording. We have 3 more plant talks this year, so you can read about what's coming up at plantnebraska.org and register there. Next week, just to give a little preview, we will have guest presenters, Bob Gittens and Stacy Corey from Nebraska Monarchs, and they're going to be talking about a super popular topic, and that is gardening for pollinators. So you probably don't want to miss that one. Let me just unshare my screen here. One other reminder, and that is super exciting. Our spring affair preview party and preview sale tickets are on sale as of today. So we are gearing up for spring affair around here. If you don't know what that is, it is actually the biggest plant sale in the Great Plains. We're very proud of that. So check it out. Lots of information, ticket prices, registration, all of that good stuff on our website, plantnebraska.org. And we hope that you will join us for that. It's the preview party, preview sale, spring affair is our biggest fundraising event of the year. So it's a huge deal. It helps us plant Nebraska all over the state, and we super appreciate your support. So just a reminder to keep your microphone on mute. If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat and we'll keep track of them. And with that, I think that covers everything. I'm going to let Christina take it from here.
All right, let me just get my screen shared. Can you see that okay, Michelle?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, perfect. Can everybody hear me okay?
I think you're good.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you all for having me on this very bright. I'm going to get blind. I keep moving my shade further down. So we'll see if by the end of the talk I can actually see my screen or not, because the sun is coming in, which is wonderful on this February day. So today we're going to be discussing canopy change. And before I guess I dive into the presentation, I just want to really encourage everybody to put on our curiosity hats. I'm going to be using a lot of examples from communities across the state. And I think it's easy. We always feel very emotional when we talk about canopy loss, to also put judgment with it. So I want us to kind of set that aside And so we can look at this more from observing what's going on, from thinking about it in a little bit broader way. And then you can put the emotion back on when it actually comes to plant the trees themselves at the end. Um, we're also we'll look at canopy change. We'll move into canopy benefits. And then we're gonna do a little individual exercise to explore some of these concepts further, and just give you a chance as well to use some of the tools I was presenting today. And I guess as well, before I get going, if you are like staff in a municipality or on a tree board, I would encourage you as well to think about attending the Nebraska Forest Service Tree Care Workshop, which is virtual, coming up in 2 weeks, because there we're going to really talk a lot about, specifically from a municipality standpoint, how to use these tools and how to think and prioritize for canopy change. This talk is going to be a little bit more general about canopy change and some of the tools we use. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to start with defining what is tree canopy. Tree canopy, really simply, is the area of leaves, branches, and stems that cover the ground when viewed from above. All right, so if you think of airplane view, looking down, that area of the tree that's covering the ground is our tree canopy. But let's be honest, mostly we're viewing the tree canopy from below, right? That's my favorite view of the tree, just looking straight up into it. We think about this with an individual tree. Arborists are going to use the term tree canopy, right? With an individual tree, they might talk about the health of your canopy or the density of your canopy, or if your canopy is thinning, or you might hear terminology around the specific tree. As an urban forester, community forester, we also use the term tree canopy, but we tend to use the term tree canopy thinking about the larger community's tree canopy, okay? So the full term is urban tree canopy or community tree canopy, but you will hear us all the time shorten that just to tree canopy. So the idea is really the same, but instead we're looking at all of the tree canopy within a designated geographic area, and it's typically expressed as a percentage of the total land area. So again, this is when it's viewed from above, it's the area of that canopy expressed as a percentage of the total land area. So knowing where a community canopy is or isn't helps us better understand what is going on within a neighborhood or town. It can help us plan, set policy, create goals, just be more strategic in where we're putting our planting efforts and our limited resources. So picture on the left, you can see that canopy from the air. If you were directly above it, that's how they would measure that percentage of canopy. But that gives you a sense, right? It's a designated geographic area there that picture is, and you can see the tree canopy there as well. So here's an example, right? City of Lincoln. In 2022, we know that the overall tree canopy within the municipal boundaries of the City of Lincoln, 18.7%. So this map on the right, you can kind of see there's very clearly here in Wilderness Park, all the light green parts, but this is the squiggles all across the map is actually the tree canopy. So knowing the overall canopy in a community is helpful, right? We kind of have a sense. We would expect on the eastern part of the state to see higher canopy percentages than as we move west. And that's simply because of rainfall, right? We tend to be able to grow more trees and more denser areas here in the eastern part of the state compared all the way to the western part of the state. But knowing the overall canopy in a community is only partially helpful. And this is really because We have development, economic, demographic, socioeconomic patterns that change across our communities. So it's very difficult to be like, hey, we're meeting our canopy goal or our canopy looks good um, at 17% in the city of Lincoln, right? Because it's going to look different if you're in downtown Lincoln or if you're in a neighborhood. So here's an example of when we look at smaller geographic areas. Um, and your smaller geographic area, it could be a piece of property, it could be school grounds, parks, census blocks, neighborhoods, really anything with some kind of meaningful boundary that can support your planning efforts for the community. Census blocks are easy to use because they're an easy data layer for folks to get. So this particular information that I'm pulling for use census blocks. So here's an example. If you looked at this particular census block that is highlighted here in blue, it had a tree canopy of 29.9%, right? So it's a lot denser tree canopy than the overall 17.7% for the entire city. So we really need to be looking at a little bit smaller areas when we think about tree canopy assessment. Okay, so another term you're going to hear, and really this is the one why we're gathered today, right, is to talk about canopy change. So really simply, it is the change in the amount of tree cover in a designated area created by comparing two snapshots of tree canopy. So typically like 5 to 8 years apart, but it's really whatever that community or the analysis had data for. So sometimes imagery isn't good enough to be able to go back really far in time and be able to use the modern methods of actually being able to do a canopy analysis. But so the data that we have available to us right now is about 5 years apart. So canopy change is really important for practitioners because it helps us do better planning, policy development and monitoring of the overall forest resource within whatever area we're looking at. And we can kind of tweak all of those things, right, to make sure that we're meeting whatever our canopy goal is once we have that data. You're also going to hear terms like loss and gain in canopy. And this is usually a percentage point change. And it's really helpful for setting canopy goals and understanding how development affects coverage goals. And you usually see kind of right alongside that a term called relative canopy change. So it's really the proportional change. It's given as a percent change of the total amount of tree canopy, and it's helpful for understanding the scale of forest gain or loss. So here's the thing. If your head's spinning with that, there's no worries. Just remember, canopy gain means more canopy cover and canopy loss means less canopy cover, okay? So here's an example of canopy change using data from treecanopy.us and looking at two block groups in Lincoln, Nebraska. So the top image shows the area that has experienced canopy gain. Does anyone have a guess why? Okay, if your guess is that because it's a new development, we're right. Okay, so this was an area of new development, right? So it was built on a farm field, basically. So you can see it has a really low percentage of canopy, and really the canopy gain you're seeing is most likely due to the growth of the trees that were planted at the time of the development. On the bottom one, we see that same census block that we were looking at earlier. And it shows canopy loss. Okay, so when they did that comparison from 2016 to 2022, you saw a canopy loss of 9.4 percentage points and a relative canopy change of 24%, right? So their 2016 canopy was 39.3%, which is incredibly high canopy. That's awesome. And in 22, the canopy was 29.9%. All right. So when we see things like that, it gives us an idea that, we are losing canopy in that area. And maybe it's something we need to be looking at, whether it's how we're replacing or maybe what the factors are for that canopy loss. And it's very, very hard to pinpoint exactly why we're losing canopy in a particular area. Sometimes you have something that's very obvious, like if it was 50% ash trees and you lost all your ash trees, you're going to be like, I think it was because of the ash. But most of the time, there's numerous factors that are at play in any of the areas that we're having canopy loss. Um, so probably the main thing we see, right, is declining trees, thinning canopy, branch dieback, and branch loss. And there could be quite a few different factors at why a tree is declining. So you could have within a single tree, it could be an old tree that's had a lot of weather extremes, and over the years, it's lost branches and storms, and it's maybe reduced its canopy because of drought it's suffered through. Maybe there's pest and disease that move in. And so you're just seeing a tree that is declining over time. And of course, because we're doing this virtually, I picked the most extreme pictures of this, right? But I will say that we have a lot of trees that are slowly declining that still are providing great service. They aren't high risk. They're still in our trees, right? But they might just not have as much canopy as they did earlier in their lives. Age, weather extremes, pest and disease, those are the things we see a lot here in our state. Of course, you could have things like mechanical damage, right? We've seen it in young trees, right? You hit the mower a whole bunch of times and finally that tree's dead. Soil compaction, lots and lots of factors. Eventually, if you get a tree that has declined to the point where it's high risk and they've determined that the removal is the mitigation option, that tree comes out, right? We have tree removals then. And that happens, of course, across our communities because we want to be able to keep people safe and still enjoy our tree canopies. You also see Mother Nature taking out our trees, right? We get a big storm, you get straight line winds, you get that ice storm, and pretty soon trees we love are down. And we also see pest and disease as well, right? Leading to tree removals. Things like emerald ash borer and other diseases where we're taking out trees just to help not only with public safety, but potentially to control the spread of a pest or disease. And there's lots of other factors. If you move out east, we always think of development, right? In the eastern part of the United States, because it's typically a forested area. Development can also be a factor here when we think about infill development. But for us in our state, it's most likely utility repair or road widening or something like that that could be a factor in why a tree has to be removed, right? And but I would say, in my opinion, storm damage, pest disease, things like that are really going to be the things that are causing those tree removals. Okay, the other thing that we see contributing to canopy loss is our planting patterns. We have a couple different planting patterns that I see. First one, tree comes down and we don't replant, right? That's the easy one. That's the one we're always like, when are they going to replant those trees? So just ultimately, if we don't replant the tree, that canopy is never replaced. Another planting pattern, right? Tree comes down, we plant a new tree. But the reality is that it's going to take a long time for that tree to have the same canopy cover as that mature tree that came down, right? So you're going to still see that canopy loss in that area, even though we've done the right thing and we've replaced the tree. Another factor we see a lot is we have a tree that comes down. You have a nice big shade tree, it comes down. And let's just pretend it was like 20 years prior, right? And we replaced that shade tree with our favorite small ornamental tree. All right. And sometimes that maybe should be the replacement because of the location. But if we're just replacing a big shade tree with an ornamental tree, now we've shrunk our canopy, right? We shrunk the canopy benefits, the canopy size over time. And so we see that shrinking happening as well. And then, of course, even if we are planting, we have the survival rates of all of the new trees we've planted. And there's lots of things that can impact that. Soil, watering, mowers, rootstock species. We're not going into that today, but that definitely isn't a factor, right, for canopy decline as well, if our replacements or a tree planting is not successful. The other thing that impacts it is past and current policy, development patterns, and investment. And these things can amplify impacts of canopy loss or gain. So you think of things of like how developments were built in the past, right? The amount of yard space, the amount of right-of-way space. Was there historic investment of trees? And how does all that all directly impact cover today? So when you think of a low canopy neighborhood, for whatever reason, maybe the yards weren't very big or there wasn't a big enough right of way, so trees weren't planted. Maybe there was just a lack of an investment within that neighborhood, so trees were never planted. We look at those low canopy neighborhoods. When they lose canopy today, it's far more noticeable, right? The impacts felt much more strongly. So example is the top image, low canopy neighborhood. It loses its canopy and a house, I guess, along the way. and it feels just so more exposed, right? Whereas if you had very, very high canopy in that neighborhood, you might not notice as much if those two trees came down. Um, Decisions about development requirements, land use, utility placement, city tree ordinances, and funding, they all play a role in whether trees have historically existed in neighborhoods and whether they're going to be there for future generations. So one of the things I thought would be kind of fun for us to do would be to drop into some Nebraska streets and look at canopy change over time. I think, at least I know I tend to, when I hear the words canopy loss or canopy gain, it's easy to visualize the most dramatic changes, right? Something all happening at once. A street that suddenly doesn't have street trees, right? Or a huge planting that happened, and then we all of a sudden we have trees all down the street. But the reality of canopy change is it's far more subtle. So I thought we'd explore multiple communities in Nebraska. This was random. I literally opened my screen and dropped in randomly in a community. So these were not handpicked areas because I knew something about them. So here's an example. This is in Columbus, Nebraska, and this image I think is 2012. Again, I was down in Street View of Google Maps. So just kind of pay attention to this street. We have this nice big tree here that I circled. Somebody planted a little, looks like maybe an oak tree on the left. Um, and a few years later, 2019, what happened in the community or in that street? We have a big tree, it's gone now. We also see though the canopy gain happening of this little oak tree. And I noticed as well that there's a tree further down the way that looks pretty yellow in that picture. Kind of makes me go, huh, maybe a declining tree. And if you look in May 2024, yep, that tree that was yellow down the way is definitely declining. Again, you don't have that big tree, but look how much some of these small trees have grown. Okay, so a story of both canopy gain and canopy loss. My guess is I don't even know if that tree that's declining is still there. My guess it's probably on its way out in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, here's another one, Omaha. This is actually a block away from where I took the screenshot of the low canopy neighborhood, okay? So it's the block further up the street. And this is 2011. And somebody had planted all these great trees along this parking lot. Looks like they've been there enough to start to get probably 10 years or so. Somebody also planted this little oak tree, it looks like, on the left. But you can see how the canopy starts to change around it. First thing you have go is the evergreen. So by 2014, that's gone. But the trees that were planted are still growing, right? Keep your eye on the two trees I circled in red there. They're gone now in 2022. But look how significant these new trees are now that were planted. They're doing a great job shading the streets, shading the sidewalks and parking lots. And look how different now it looks without all of those other big shade trees. And so really you have an example here, oops, of two completely different canopy stories just a block away from each other, right? You have that low canopy block, and then you have this block here where you have good tree replacement that's been successful and is really providing benefit. Hey, here's another one. This is Prescott Avenue in Lincoln. If you're in Lincoln, you probably know where Prescott is. This is fun because they actually had imagery back to 2009. I will say, I don't know what's going on with the tree that's right in the middle where it's blurry, but it has been in witness protection for many years, and you will see that through the pictures. So we don't really know what happens to that tree, but all of these other trees are going to start to change here. So keep your eye on the left side of the street. And we see by 2018 that first tree came out. By 2022, we have several more trees that came out on that side of the street. Changes it, doesn't it? Very different feel. And we're seeing not really any tree replacement coming back into this particular neighborhood. Okay, if you turn around in that same spot and look up the street, here's what it looked like in 2009. Here's what it looks like in 2022. So you have 3 trees that have left the area. Makes a huge difference. Not really that many trees, but totally changes the canopy in that one intersection. But you also see how many trees have grown around that area if you look at how big they are. Okay, here's another one. If you look further up Prescott, this is actually where Union College is. And I actually did know this one, and I have to be honest, this is the one I actually handpicked because I did know that a bunch of trees came out. This was ash trees. And so they were preparing for emerald ash borer. You can see in 2009 kind of what the street looked like. There were all these big ash trees up along the building. You can see in 2012, several of these ash trees are starting to look in decline. We don't know if they had EAB necessarily, but ash trees just tend to look rough in the state. And they took them down, all but this one that's still left in the parking lot. And they replanted, right, with other trees. So you can see those young trees. You can see on the left, trees have grown a little bit. And then you can see by 2022, that big ash tree that was along the building is gone. But look how much those little trees that they planted have grown by that time. Like not really a huge amount of time, but there's been a lot of growth in those trees. Another example of both canopy loss and canopy gain happening kind of within the same space. So if you look at the house on the right, just kind of observe there's some young trees, there's some medium-sized trees around it. And then on the left is going to be the story of canopy loss. This is 2021. You can see how much trees have started to grow up around that house, and now we don't have canopy on the left side. And by 2022, we have even more trees that have disappeared from the left. But we have some pretty good canopy going on the right. Here's another example. This is Beatrice, Nebraska. So this is 2007. Um, and Beatrice has had so many windstorms and different big events that have happened in it. This was a great picture because it was a very densely canopied street. Probably actually quite a bit denser than we typically see in our communities. So this is 2007. Here's an example of how the same street looks in 2023. So you can see how many trees have come down over time. Here's another example in Beatrice. Again, 2007. You kind of have the low canopy side of the street, and then you have this other side of the street that has more canopy to it. And by 2023, you see multiple things happening, right? We see trees that they've had to have been taken out, they were removed. But we see some of those old big trees hanging on, right? So now we're seeing that example of declining trees that I was talking about. They're still providing benefits and stuff like that in the area. They might not be ready to come out, but you have much thinner, sparser canopies on those same trees. So my point in all of this is that canopy change is uneven and nuanced. Okay, so in one area, even if it's the area and on a map it says, hey, this area has canopy loss or this area has canopy gain or even no measurable change, the reality is trees are growing, they're expanding canopy, they're declining, they're losing canopy, they're disappearing because of removals, and they're being planted. So there's just lots of things happening within our communities. The reality, I think, for us is that our experiences with the canopy we see today are different. And I think this is sometimes where the emotion and everything comes from, right? So how many people sympathize or relate to this idea, right? Remember when this street was so shaded? Does anyone have that? They're like, I just remember when the street was so shaded, right? There were so many trees in this area. I think if you talk to any of us in the Forest Service or Plant Nebraska, we could say that driving around communities. We'd be like, I just remember when there was like way more trees. But you could have a completely different the same time period, somebody else, right? Let's say somebody who uses the trail that goes through the same neighborhood and they're like, this is amazing. These trees are so nice. I love running on this trail, right? Because maybe their experience wasn't that history of what the shade felt like before. So you could have two completely different experiences with trees in today's canopy, which I also think can be hard because we kind of all have to get to the same page in conversation about what kind of canopy and canopy level we want in our neighborhoods, right? What we feel like it should be. For us, as on the state level, as practitioners, it's great when we start to have data beyond just we think we're seeing a lot of trees come down, or it seems like a lot of trees are coming down. It seems like everything's changing. I remember when, right? And so recently there was actually a canopy assessment done. It was nationwide. For Nebraska, there's data for communities over 1,000 people. And we learned a lot from it. And the thing that we learned is that Nebraska is finally winning at something. It's just not football. We're winning at canopy loss. I don't know if it's what we want to be winning at, but we are winning. We do have the most canopy loss in the country. And I think, like I said earlier, if you just zoom out, it's this for the entire state in our communities. And it just gives us a sense, right? We're losing canopy. But you start pulling up communities and you start looking at them, and it's lots of communities are losing canopy, right? What this does for us is kind of go, yeah, like we are losing canopy. And it starts to give us numbers to figure out how much canopy we've been losing. And maybe and hopefully helps us all be a little bit more strategic about where we're putting canopy back in over time. When we see this canopy loss specifically, it is really concerning to us because we know that tree benefits are higher with higher canopy cover. And we know there's going to be a lot of factors and changes over time with climate changing, with um, how planting rates is how they're happening. That's all also going to impact future canopy. So I would expect that we're going to continue to see canopy decline over time. So our benefits are numerous for our tree canopy. These are not listed, by the way, in the order of the benefits with the whether it's high canopy cover, low canopy cover. It's just a list of benefits. Um, So study after study shows us that high canopy cover in general has improved benefits. So here's an example, 2018 study, urban clear zones, street trees, and road safety. They found that in Denver, large and large streets with high or large street tree canopies, they're associated with improved safety outcomes. Whether they were talking about total crashes or they just were focusing on injury and fatality crashes, those streets were safer. Okay. We know things like higher density contiguous canopy reduces summer temperatures, 6 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. So hold on to that number in your head because we're going to talk about heat a little bit here. We see innovative studies like this one coming out from the University of Louisville, which is looking in depth at the cardiovascular disease and tree connection. And they've been tracking 745 residents in a neighborhood near a busy highway, and they planted thousands of large trees. I mean, these were like huge because they have a limited time to do this study. Um, and they're already seeing significant reduction in inflammation marker in their blood. And this inflammation marker is associated with reduced risk of heart disease. We also know things like just we're ultimately emotional beings, right? We like to be in places that feel good and look good, and trees are something that gives us that. So we have studies that show we have do more physical activity with higher canopy, we have improved mental health, tons and tons and tons of benefits. So we know if we lose canopy to a certain point, these benefits are reduced, right? So here's an example. Where do you want to be in a hot day? If it was a 70-degree spring day, I definitely want to be the girl on the slide. That sounds great. But if it is a 90-degree day in July, I do not want to be there, right? I want to be on that shaded street. I want the cool canopy. I want the protection of that. And there's really a good reason for that. There's a reason we all go stand in the shade when we're having to be outside for a long period of time. Um, Here's a photo my counterpart sent. He's in California. He sent me the surface temperature of a safety surface at a childcare facility. It was an 83-degree day. Pretty nice. Sounds great in California. But the surface temperature for the playground safety surface was 163 degrees Fahrenheit. Ouch, right? Like that place needs shade. Air temperature, right? We know that the temperature of our air and heat, it kills. It literally kills people. So we look at the extreme temperature. If it's over 90 degrees, 95 degrees, you start to have really not great heat outcomes for people, particularly elderly, young, day laborers, which are the most vulnerable. And this is concerning because when in my head, I'm putting together like, okay, we know all these benefits, particularly with heat. We see a reduction of canopy over time, and we see things like this. This map is from the Climate Mapping for Resilience and Adaptation. and it models how many heat days we'll have in the future. So it starts with historic data starting in 1976, and then it goes through 2099. So I selected 100 degrees on this. If you get into this tool, you could do it yourself, pick whatever you want. But the dark red means 32 days or above over 100 degrees each year. And the light orange is 16 degrees or above over 100 degrees each year. So I'm going to play it one more time. We'll see if it, nope, here we go. Play it one more time. You can see kind of the red and orange start to move up through the state, right? So think about tree canopy and how long we need to make it have an impact and to replace it. I think this is another confirmation, right? That we really need to be thinking about heat and trees within our communities. How do we get those canopies back up? Here's another example. This is South Sioux City. I took two different census blocks that they had. I took one purposely that had an urban heat index that was really high. It was 9, and an urban heat index that was low. And just looked at their canopy, right? And you can see there's a big canopy difference between them. We have one at 13% and one at 22%. So really thinking about how can we restore our community canopy as a heat resilience tool, okay? I think this could be very motivating for all of us because I think we all, when we talk about heat, we all can feel it, right? So I want you to think of something. Where do you experience heat on your block or neighborhood on a summer day? I want you to think of that spot. Okay, got the spot? Now I want you guys to, we're going to do a little research. So I want you to open your browser, any browser, doesn't matter which one. You can minimize the meeting here so you can still hear it. You're going to open Google Maps. And to do that, you can just type in Google Maps in your browser search bar. And you're going to search for that street or address that you were thinking about. Okay. You can get close if it's near your own address, you could put it in, and then you could just zoom or pan to find that area. And then once you have that, I want you to drop into Street View. Okay. So the way you're going to do that, if you've never done it before, there's a yellow person in the lower right-hand corner. And I want you to drag that person to the area that you want to see in Street View, and then release your mouse, and it should drop you into that spot. And then once you're there, I want you to answer the question to yourself, what is the tree canopy like? You can even put it in the chat if you want. I don't know if people can see both their chat but you're welcome to put it in the chat as well. So what's the tree canopy like in that whole area? You can also, there's that kind of a black box in the upper left-hand corner that has the date that picture was taken. So you could think to yourself if you've seen any canopy changes since that street view was taken. Sometimes they're a few years back and you remember like, oh yeah, a tree came down, or that tree came down in that storm that was last summer. Then if you want to, if it says see more dates in that black box, you could click back through just to see kind of what the canopy change looked like over time. And then you could answer the question, is there an opportunity for tree planting in that area? Does it look like it would be physically possible and a good spot for a tree or trees to go back in that area? You could also answer the question, if you see a brand new tree in that area, hey, is there a tree that I need to help water and make sure it's getting watered? Because you might also see that in the Google view. I'll just give a few more seconds for people to do that. Okay, so we're going to move on to one other tool. So to get to this one, you're going to type in your browser search treecanopy.us. And the tool's going to open, and you will see within the tool a search bar on top of the map. And you could type in that same location. And you can put in anything you want to explore, but one idea is to put in that same location that you were just looking at from Google Street View. You can get there. You can also get there by just starting to pan and zoom in as well, if you know where you are. And then once you're in that area, you can right click, or actually you don't even have to right click. You can just click on that census block, and you're going to see a bar appear to the right that provides all sorts of information from the assessment that was done. And you can start to answer questions like, what percentage current canopy does your area have? You can look at what the loss and the gain in canopy is, the relative canopy change. And you could even see the urban heat index. And we're not going to go super in depth in how to use this tool and all the different things you can do with it. I just more want to introduce it to folks to be like, hey, this is kind of a cool tool. Plus, it's all fun, right? We all like to explore things and look at it closer. But these tools are great, right? Because it kind of gives us some data, or it gives us a sense of what's happening. And it helps us think about, okay, maybe where could I prioritize in my own neighborhood or my own community if I'm going to put efforts into it to get trees planted. Here's what tools don't do. Tools don't do this. Tools do not help you build community. Okay. So inherently, trees and communities require community and collaboration. Okay. So the only way ultimately that we are going to get trees planted back into our communities and into these areas is literally yard by yard, street by street, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, connection by connection. And it's going to take both programs and policies and everything happening at the city level, right? And that's stuff that we'll talk, like I'm going to talk about in a couple weeks at the Nebraska Forest Service tree care workshops. But for us as citizens, right, within our communities, it's going to take us. And if I could have figured out how to get the GIF into here with the Chihuahua going, who me? That's literally, I want you to imagine, like it's going to take us, right, doing it. And it's going to be taking us to be aware and to see things within our neighborhoods and build those connections socially in the neighborhoods and figure out what is right for canopy replacement. I will say not all canopy coming down is necessarily bad because there's sometimes where like it just doesn't make sense to have trees, right? So it's not if canopy is lost, it's immediately bad. But we need to have conversations about what those canopy levels look like. How do we plant trees? And I think what we can do on this call, every single one of us, is think about that hotspot in our community and take some steps this year to actually put a tree there. Okay, based on the information we've thought about today or looked at. And maybe it is a connection with your neighbor, maybe it's a connection with the city, maybe it's helping connect people to resources with the city, maybe it's organizing the tree planting yourself, maybe it's being the person that's like, hey, if you organize the tree planting, I will be the tree waterer because I just want to put in my earbuds and I don't want to talk to anybody, but I'm just going to be the one that waters those trees. Maybe if it's the city that's planting trees and you're like, it doesn't look like they're being cared for, you go, can I help water? Or can I get some people? Yeah, you should adopt a tree and keep it watered this summer. So I just really I want to maybe challenge us because this does feels kind of not very hopeful when we look at the data, right? When we see the amount of loss happening in our communities. But I think the cool thing about trees is we can all control our efforts when it comes to trees. And it doesn't take always huge things by each one of us. If each one of us does a little bit with trees, whether it's planting or caring for young trees, it makes a big difference. So I want to go back to that Prescott example. You guys remember, go back to Prescott and by Union College and all those trees, right? But what you don't know is around the corner, and I wish I could have found a picture of it and I could not. I, at the time, was living in a rental. And I was like, I'm going to plant a tree. I want to plant a tree on the right of way. So I planted one tree. Okay. There's one tree on the right of way. If you go around that area, you'll probably see it. It's an oak. It looks great. It's very happy. So I planted that tree and took care of it and watered it, right? Got permission from the city to do it. And at the time, the property owner goes, such a good idea to plant more trees. I bet those trees are going to come out or out too around the way. And he planted trees. So he planted trees as well in the same block, right? And then the Union College person, it was a reach out to them to go, hey, would you consider planting trees? I see that these are ash and they're probably going to come down. It's like, great. They planted trees. So it's not always that simple. Sometimes it's very difficult to make those connections. But the point is, start where you're living, in your block, in your yard, in your neighborhood, because those are the social connections that you have to be able to plant trees. There's one other thing I want to leave you guys with today. Water your trees. If you planted last year, your trees need water right now, like today in February. And they need water during the summer as well. Okay. Um, with that, let's keep it the good life here in Nebraska and keep planting trees. Any questions?
We have a few in the chat. First of all, thank you. That
Okay.
was so fascinating. Those tools are incredible. And I love that even though the data is a little demoralizing and sad, I do love that it is a fixable problem. I feel like right now we're seeing so many problems that seem kind of unfixable or at least super daunting. This is a fixable problem. So
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so this person, Steve, said, can you talk more about fewer car crashes and less crime with increased tree canopy? What would that be? Pete kind of answered it. I don't know if you can elaborate on that more. I was also particularly interested in why trees reduce car crashes. I wasn't like, I'm not getting that connection. Um, and
Yeah,
Pete
that
said,
particular study was just looking at clear zones that were typically like used on streets and comparing those with zones like without trees to ones that had big trees to see if there was a difference in crash rate. And so they were actually finding that like, hey, these streets that had trees had lower crashes. So I don't, the study didn't go into specifically why.
I
So like it was
know.
just comparing the two.
I wonder. So Pete said trees can act, and this makes sense to me, act as a traffic calming
Yep.
device. So drivers naturally slow down. There's
Yeah.
probably like even mental health benefit, like people are
Yeah.
less road ragey when they're in a
Yeah.
tree lined neighborhood. And
And I
then
know
providing,
there's a lot of other studies talking about traffic in trees. So the best thing I would say if you want to explore it more would be to like put in Google Scholar and start looking at traffic in trees. Because there's some studies on like exactly what Pete said about traffic speeds, people slowing down. Um, there's a lot of different studies related to that. Oh, hi, Pete. I see your hand. There you go.
I think if someone were going to look up, there's a researcher named Eric Dunbar
Oh, there
at
you go.
the University of Florida now. He was at A&M for a long time, and he was very focused on different studies about distracted driving, traffic calming, things that drivers naturally experience in their commute and then teasing out the impact of trees and natural scenes versus man-made scenes like billboards and lights and
Yeah.
signs. The stress level and cortisol levels in drivers is kind of extreme. So just worth looking at if you're interested in the research.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
super interesting. Sarah added there's a separate study that says people are less likely to speed on canopy trees than open trees or open streets. So,
Yeah.
okay. There are a few other questions in here. I'm just gonna scan up. Okay, Kurt is in the Benson Community Garden area in Omaha. So he's talking about introducing smaller fruiting trees, large native shrubs, serviceberry, American plum, persimmon, pawpaw, etc. So even though most of the space is devoted to gardeners growing fruits and vegetables, do layered plantings like these meaningfully contribute to urban canopy restoration, or is canopy impact only measured by the large shade trees?
Large shade trees have more benefits simply because they have larger canopies. That doesn't mean that the younger or the plantings that he's talking about don't have benefits that contribute positively to canopy. They're just different, right? You're providing food, you're providing wildlife habitat, you're providing separation from traffic, you're providing mental health benefits, you're providing all those things, right? It's just different and different. Every tree is going to provide different amounts of benefit. And this is where we get into the nuance of like planning and having to look at specific areas and exactly what benefits we are planting trees for. So if your goal is to provide um, more food options in a neighborhood, to provide increased habitat and things, then you're meeting that with the type of canopy you're providing. So
Yeah, that's another reason why we talk about diversity, right? So meeting different needs. Um, Nancy is asking, is there a percentage goal for community canopy in Nebraska? Cool. What are we
no.
aiming for? Okay.
Here's my answer to that. It's no. There's two reasons. First of all, the amount of rainfall and water we get is dramatically different between this part, Lincoln, where I'm at, and if you go all the way out to Scottsbluff, right? So the idea that you're going to have the same percentage of canopy is just like doesn't even make sense. The other thing that should impact a canopy goal, right, is actually what residents want in the community, because this is the place that you live. And so some of that has to be decided locally, and it has to be decided based on the resources that can be provided, the local environment, socioeconomic development factors, all of that play into it. So it's not as simple as just going like, hey, this is exactly the canopy we want. And if you go back to, a neighborhood level, that's why we also say, hey, we want to analyze this and think about this in smaller areas, right? Because saying that I want 20% canopy in downtown Lincoln doesn't really make sense when I have buildings that are 10 stories high all around me, and you have tons and tons and tons of impervious surface. But that 20% in a very eastern area of the state in a residential area might seem kind of low. So the answer is no. From the state, we don't. And that we're also very happy to help you think through that as a community or as an area, what would be an appropriate canopy goal based on your goals.
Can you recommend some species that you would suggest planting in space, like a street side space or in the hill strip area or that narrow area near the sidewalk?
Yes, there is actually a publication that's on Plant Nebraska's website, I believe, that has street trees. Yeah, that downtown trees. I think that would be a good one to look at,
Let me
to
see
list
if I
them
can
all.
find it quick.
That's going to have more of the nuance again, depending on where you are in the state. So, oh, I like that, Pete. 500 planting locations. There you go. I like that. There was a comment earlier about, I just want to address it, like, hey, Nebraska is the most canopy lost. Like, it's also not surprising Nebraska has the most canopy loss. And I'm going to say that because Iowa is right behind us. Um, we're pretty dang close with Iowa. First of all, the trees in our communities, for the most part, are all planted, right? We've like literally converted grassland to development and planting. So we are in areas of the country that had forested land that we've converted to development. Um, so, and on top of that, it is just really hard to be a tree in our state. It's really hard. Like it's really hard to be a tree. We have a lot of climatic events in our states. In our state, we have really aging canopy. We just have a lot of things that are factors that are impacting that. And quite honestly, factors that are completely out of our control. Like even if we replanted every single one of those trees right now, we're still going to be losing canopy because of the reality that these old mature trees are coming down in our communities or have to come down in some instances. So I think really the story about canopy loss is to be like, hey, a reminder to all of us, if we don't do something, if we're not replacing those trees, if we're not going into areas that maybe never had trees and all of that, our communities are going to look very radically different in another 40 or 50 years. So that's what I see in it. I see Pete nodding his head. But so that's what I would say. Like the canopy loss, it's happening in our state. How much does agricultural spray have on trees in their canopy? The answer is we don't know. And that is something that there needs to be more research done on. We have been, as an agency, doing herbicide tests of trees throughout the state to see if we can see growth regulator herbicides in those tissue samples, in which we do. We do see that. Do we think that it impacts? And I would say I want to broaden it from just ag chemicals to like lawn chemicals. People are spraying things. They get things at Home Depot or and you're spraying it on your lawn. You're spraying it on your school lawns. You're spraying it in your golf courses. So it's not just like it's across, right? It's the stuff we're doing within communities and potentially ag lands. So we are seeing herbicide damage. And clearly, anytime a tree is stressed over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, you're going to start to see decline on that tree. Now, how much of it's herbicide compared to all the other stressors that our trees have, that is not something that necessarily we have the data on. So, but it's something we're watching and concerned about for sure.
We do have a plant talk coming up on March 5th with Justin Evertson and Brad Kindler talking about
Perfect. Yeah.
that exact topic, herbicide injury to trees. So that could be one to tune into. I know we're going to wrap it up here in a second. We have maybe one other question from David about any thoughts on ways to promote not just tree planting, but more sustainable tree planting. I'm frustrated by tree plantings that involve calorie repair, and they may contribute to shade, but also are problematic. So
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
It's always a hard one. I will talk a little bit about policy. There are some communities that have been moving to ordinances that rather than having acceptable tree lists for planting, we've been encouraging communities to come up with like, those 5 trees that you really don't want planted in your community. Calorie pear being one of them, right? Because it's invasive. So you're starting to see some communities adopt that, which then helps limit what species are being planted, especially on right-of-ways and public spaces. It's a very hard thing because people like them, right? Like you see things, they like the flowers, they like how they look, they like how they're structured. If you're arborist, you don't like their actual structure, they fall apart, but people like their shape, right? They like how they look. So I would say it's kind of a twofold in that situation, right? That's really a partnership that has to be between your cities and what they are putting as allowable trees, and also your green industry. So we're moving away from those species, and then just also general education and knowledge. Um, the reality is that in some areas, what you have to plant is based on what you can get at your box store. And if you're seeing things like calorie pear and your hybrid maples, and that's all you have, then that's all you're planting. So I think I kind of throw out there the nuance of it all. But again, it's going to matter kind of what area of the state you're in, um, and really what the core issue is for that.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah.
That was super informative, really interesting. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate you being here, and we appreciate your advocacy work and your planting. So thank you for that. Come back next Thursday for Gardening with Pollinators. That will also be, I'm sure, a great presentation. So I'll send out the link to this one later this afternoon, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christina.